for State Senate District 6, Mark Hutchison.
Thank you, Joy. Well, she must have got that introduction and the materials from my mother. I just sent you pages and pages because I gave her such a hard time. She can't actually believe that I did something worthwhile in my life, and she just passed that stuff around people. Well, listen, it's great to be here with you. It's great to be among true believers, people who believe in the Constitution, people who believe in the most beneficial and opportunistic and virtuous government that's ever been created on the planet. And a lot of my core values surface from what I did as a young man and my influence with my family, my father in particular, who was a blue-collar worker, didn't graduate from college, worked for 45 years. You may have heard of an equipment rental company here in town called Ahern Rentals. He was John Ahern's first employee in 1953, and he remained employed until literally until he passed away at the age of 65 with Alzheimer's complications. But it was just such a wonderful experience for my dad to be there. And I started working there when I was 12 years old. Continued to work there. Don't ask me where the child labor laws were at the time. I have no idea. But I started working when I was 12 years old with my father and worked there all the way up until the time I went to law school. And just love just the salt of the earth, wonderful people who work every day of their lives, who live by the rules, and who want to make a life for themselves and for their children. And that's what I think our election's about. And that's what I think we're at a crossroads. And I don't know you're true believers in this, I'm preaching to the choir, but the very fundamental core of America is on trial. We have a president who told us in 2008 that he was going to fundamentally change our system of government. Remember that? He told us that. He didn't deceive us, didn't hide it from us, and he went about over the last, has gone about over the last 3.5 years, seeking to fulfill that campaign promise. He has tried to fundamentally change our system of government. And 2012 now is a referendum on that act, and whether or not we believe that we should fundamentally change our system of government. And if people believe that we ought to have we ought to be more like Europe, then he's your candidate. If you believe that we have founding fathers who rebelled from that very types of system of government, you know, these kings and these tyrants and these dictators who have ruled the world and said we're going to try a different form of government, an experimental form of government, one with divided power and authority, both horizontally and vertically among the separations of powers and between the federal and the state government, and who set up the system of government that had been never tried before in the history of the world, but has for the last 225 plus years created the most prosperous and wealthy and benevolent and kind and virtuous country in the entire history of the world, that allows us to have these great freedoms and opportunities, our children have these great freedoms and opportunities. If you believe in that system of government, that is a very fundamentally different system of government than many people who follow our current president believe in. Because if some people say, well, where is Barack Obama from? Is he from, is he really from Hawaii? Is he from Kenya? All that stuff. I'll tell you where he's from. He's from Brussels. He's from Europe. Because he wants to take us to Europe. He wants the European model of government. If you want to understand what's going on in this country and what those policies are, they're not random policies that we ought to be trying to, let's pass health care legislation, let's pass other types of entitlement legislation that's going to continue to perpetuate European welfare, European health care, European unemployment, right? European vacation, European maternity, European education. It is all becoming European. And we see how good that model works in Europe. We see what Greece is going through in Spain and France and everybody's, and there's this referendum that's sweeping even over in Europe now that we don't want to have to live within our means. We don't want, we just want the government to take care of us from cradle to grave. If that's your system of government, then there's a president currently in the White House, and there is a political philosophy out there that is for you. But for the rest of us who believe that fundamentally America stands for something, including and most importantly liberty and freedom and opportunity, then that's what's on the ballot in 2012. And I tell people this all the time. Is this a perfect time for me to be running? Is it a perfect time for any of these candidates to be running? Steve be running, hey, Mike, anybody back there, Adam, Chris? No, it's not a perfect time to be running. But if you're not running in 2012, then you better be supporting a candidate, or you better be writing checks, or you better be holding meetings like this, trying to get people to support other candidates. Otherwise, our system of government will no longer be on this earth. And America cannot be replaced. There's no other system in the world, there's no other country on the planet that is the United States of America. There's nowhere else to go, folks. If we lose it, there's nowhere else to go. So, how does this all come into play with my running for the state senate? If you read the Constitution of the United States, the state senates play an integral and core role in our federalist system of government. It is, in fact, the system of government that predated the federal government. Remember that? We were 13 states before we ever created a federal government. And what we said was, we're going to create a federal government with limited enumerated powers. And as John Marshall said, the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, who was appointed by George Washington, who himself was a founding father, he said, so that we will never forget these limitations and these enumerated powers, we are writing down the U.S. Constitution. And that's the whole purpose of the United States Constitution, so that we never forget that this federal government is limited in its powers. And whenever there's overreaching by the federal government, there's many ways we can deal with that. One of the ways that we're supposed to be dealing with that was the separation of powers. We have a president now who can't wait for Congress and doesn't want to hear from the U.S. Supreme Court, right? What he wants to be is he wants to be a very strong executive who can make all the decisions in this country. What do we call that? We call that a dictator, a tyrant, a king. It's exactly what our founding fathers rejected and said, rather than have an efficient government, what we want is a government that promotes liberty and freedoms and opportunities. And so we'll divide that power. And yes, you will wait for the Congress. And if it's unconstitutional that the law is passed, the U.S. Supreme Court can tell you that. And oh, by the way, Congress has got to fund your budget, and you're the commander-in-chief, and all those divisions of power were for one purpose, to maintain our liberties and our opportunities. And don't forget, that's the horizontal division of power. What about the vertical division of power? That's us. That's the states. And in March of 2010, the states had had enough. And they sued the federal government, and they said, we're not going to put up with this overarching federal encroachment on state rights and our citizens' rights. And for the first time, in an unprecedented way, 26, now 27 states, if you count those who have now passed legislation, 30 states have joined together and said we're pushing back. And in this instance, it was against the healthcare legislation. Most of you have heard me talk about that. But the principle that's at play here is the states are pushing back. They're saying we're not going to put up with this overreaching, encroaching federal government. And here's one way that we can push back. You say, well, what do we do? So what do we do? Well, one thing we can do is we can bring back some of these federal officers to the state legislature, and we can bring back Shelley Berkeley, we can bring back Harry Reid, and Joe Heck, and Dean Howard, and all of them. Let's make it an equal opportunity session here, and have these accountability sessions, and sit them down and say, now, Congressman Berkeley, when you voted to pass the healthcare legislation, did you stop for a minute to consider what the fiscal impact would be on the rest of us back here in Nevada? Because we've heard from Brian Sandoval with his budget exactly what it was. Every month, this is just one facet of it, every month under the healthcare legislation, 4,000 new Medicaid enrollees come on board. Every month, every month, every month. We have to double the number of Medicaid recipients and those who are eligible by federal mandate. It used to be that we used to control that as a state. This used to be a partnership between the states and the federal government. Feds would fund it. States would decide what the eligibility for. No longer under the healthcare legislation. Now our roles double. 100% increase in the number of Medicaid eligible recipients at a cost of $100 million a year. $100 million a year. Ms. Berkeley, now you're sitting in front of the legislature. Can you tell us why it was you voted for that bill, and when you voted for it, did you think of the fiscal impact? And you know what? She may not show up. That's okay. And you ask Harry Reid, he may show up. And then you let everybody in Nevada know that none of them decided to come back to Carson City to report back to us what they're doing in Washington, D.C. To have the federal officials who are supposed to be representing our interests come back to the people's representatives in the state and explain to us why it is that this cost continues to skyrocket, why it is that these federal regulations continue to skyrocket, and why we're choking out business and